Welcome to the deep dive. And you are tuning in today because we are tackling something that, well, it requires a bit of intellectual stamina, honestly.
Yeah, that is definitely an understatement.
Right. We are not just looking at the broad strokes of medieval history today or, just summarizing some theological movement. Today, we are getting into the absolute granular architecture of one of the most ambitious, comprehensive, and just demanding intellectual projects ever attempted by a human being.
It really is.
We are opening up the Summa Theologica by St. Thomas Aquinas.
It is a staggering achievement. And just to set the stage for exactly what we're dealing with here, this massive text was written between 1265 and 1274.
Which is a remarkably short window.
It is. The sheer volume of output from Aquinas during this period is difficult to even comprehend.
Yeah.
Especially given that he was, writing by hand, dictating to multiple scribes simultaneously, and he was traveling extensively the whole time. But there is this fascinating paradox right at the outset of the Summa. In his prologue, Aquinas explicitly states that his intention is to write a manual for the, quote, instruction of beginners.
That's the part that always makes me laugh.
Right.
You look at the Summa sitting on a bookshelf, and it's usually printed in 3 to 5 massive, dense volumes totaling thousands of pages. And it tackles the most pertinent, existential, and philosophical questions in the entire history of Western thought.
Absolutely.
It is still heavily debated by the greatest scholars alive today. And Aquinas thought of this as the introductory textbook for novice Dominican friars.
Yeah, it really speaks to the rigorous intellectual climate of the 13th century university system. But his goal was genuinely pedagogical.
He was trying to teach.
Right. Before the Summa, theological education was somewhat scattered. Students would read commentaries on specific books of the Bible, or maybe collections of localized arguments. Aquinas wanted to build a unified, systematic curriculum.
He wanted to pull it all together.
Yes. He wanted to show how every single concept, from the nature of God to the mechanics of a single human decision, is logically connected.
And I think that is exactly the hook for why this text matters so much to you, regardless of your personal theological background. Imagine trying to write a manual that categorizes literally everything in existence.
Everything.
From the exact physics of how angels move through space, to the psychological microsteps of making a simple choice, to the very nature of an infinite God. We are going to explore the universe through the ultimate 13th century reality map today.
Theologica plan.
We'll be focusing specifically on the highly detailed framework of the first part and the beginning of the second part. Okay, let's unpack this. Where does someone even begin when they are trying to write the theory of absolutely everything?
Well, you have to establish the rules of engagement first. For Aquinas, that means starting with sacred doctrine itself. This is question 1 in the first part.
Right at the top.
Exactly. Before he talks about God, he has to justify the method he's about to use. So he begins by asking these fundamental structural questions. Is this doctrine a science? Is it practical or speculative? Is God actually the object of this science?
He's laying down the tracks before he runs the train.
He is laying down strict epistemological groundwork, yes.
It seems like he's trying to preempt the philosophers of his day who might, dismiss theology as just a collection of nice, poetic stories.
Oh, absolutely.
He wants to firmly establish that theology is a rigorous science, a systematic way of knowing, right alongside biology or astronomy.
Precisely. And in the scholastic framework, a science is a body of knowledge that proceeds from established principles.
Like math.
Right. Geometry is a science because it proceeds from self-evident axioms. Aquinas argues that sacred doctrine is a science, but its principles are derived from a higher science, namely the knowledge possessed by God and the blessed.
Okay, I see.
So just as an engineer uses the principles established by the physicist, the human theologian uses the principles revealed by God. It's a beautifully layered approach to epistemology.
And once he sets those ground rules, he really doesn't waste any time. He jumps straight into the deep end with a treatise on the one God, covering questions 2 through 26.
He does.
He systematically approaches the existence and nature of God. And I want to look closely at question 2, article 1, word, whether the existence of God is self-evident.
This is a crucial one.
Because he doesn't just assume that everyone inherently knows God exists. He subjects the idea to his own rigorous method.
What's fascinating here is his method. This is where we see the brilliance of the scholastic method in action. Every single article in the Summa follows the exact same rhythm.
It's very formulaic.
Very. He starts with a weather question. Then he lists the strongest possible objections to his own eventual position. In this case, he lists arguments for why God's existence is self-evident.
He argues against himself first.
Exactly. Then he gives a sed contra, or, on the contrary, usually quoting a heavy authority like Augustine or Aristotle. Then he provides his respondeo, his actual answer where he breaks down the logic. Finally, he replies to each of the initial objections one by one.
So on the question of whether God's existence is self-evident, how does he navigate that? Because if you say it is self-evident, you basically shut down the need for philosophy.
Right.
But if you say it isn't, you seem to be conceding ground to atheism.
He draws a really vital distinction here. He says a proposition can be self-evident in two ways, in itself and to us.
Okay.
In itself, the proposition God exists is self-evident because God's essence is his existence. The predicate is included in the subject, but
Right.
because we do not natively comprehend the essence of God, our minds are finite and limited to sensory experience, the proposition is not self-evident to us.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Therefore, it needs to be demonstrated by things that are more known to us, even if they are less known in their own nature, namely God's effects in the physical world.
And that sets up his famous 5 ways, the proofs for God's existence based on motion, causation, contingency, degree, and design.
Exactly.
He's essentially saying we can't look directly at the sun, but we can prove the sun is there by looking at the shadows it casts.
That's a highly accurate analogy for his entire theological project, honestly. And from there, the meticulous breakdown of God's attributes is just staggering.
Yeah, he shifts gears entirely.
Having proved that God exists, he immediately pivots to figuring out what God is, or, more accurately, what God is not. This is known as the via negativa.
The negative way.
Yes, he asks, is God a body, in question 3? Is God perfect, in question 4? Is God infinite, in question 7? And then in questions 9 and 10, he explores whether God is immutable, meaning unchanging and eternal.
The breakdown of is God a body is deeply rooted in Aristotle, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's evaluating those concepts of potentiality and actuality.
Yes. Aquinas relies heavily on the Aristotelian concepts of act and potency. Anything that is a body has matter, and matter has potentiality.
Meaning it can change.
Right. It has the potential to change, to be divided, to become something else. A block of marble has the potential to become a statue.
But God isn't marble.
Exactly. Aquinas has already established God as the first mover, the uncaused cause. The first mover must be pure actuality actus purus, with absolutely no unfulfilled potential. Therefore, God cannot possibly have a material body. God is entirely immaterial.
And that concept of pure actuality trickles down right into question 9, regarding God's immutability.
It does.
If God is pure act, he cannot change. Change implies moving from a state of potentiality into actuality. You didn't have a trait, and now you do. Or you had a trait, and you lost it.
Which implies a lack.
Exactly. But if God is perfectly complete, there is no before and after state to move between.
Exactly. God is entirely outside of time. Time is the measure of change, and if there is no change, there is no time. That leads directly to question 10, God's eternity. God possesses the whole fullness of life all at once, in a simultaneous present.
And that brings up some incredible philosophical friction when we get to question 14, God's knowledge.
Oh, this is where it gets really dense.
The questions he poses here are so highly specific, they almost sound like riddles. He asks if God knows things other than himself. Does he know evil things? Does he know singular things, like this specific grain of sand or my specific dog? And does he know future contingent things?
What's fascinating here is, again, his method. Aquinas doesn't just make declarative statements from a pulpit. He is attempting to apply human reason to infinite concepts, and he refuses to take the easy way out.
He tests his own system.
Endlessly. Take the question of whether God knows singular things. In Aristotelian philosophy, the intellect abstracts universal concepts from particular things. We know dogness universally, but we sense this particular dog physically.
Right.
If God doesn't have a physical body or senses, how can he know this one specific singular dog?
Right, because if God only knows pure universal forms, he would be incredibly distant from our actual lived reality. How does Aquinas solve that?
He argues that God knows all things by knowing his own essence. Because God is the active cause of every single thing that exists, down to the tiniest atom, he knows those things precisely because he knows his own power to create them.
That's clever.
It's like an architect. An architect knows the specific details of a building, not just by looking at it, but by knowing the blueprint in his own mind. God's knowledge isn't passive data collection, it's the active cause of the things known.
But that naturally leads to the problem of evil.
Of course.
If God knows everything by knowing his own creative power, and God only creates good things, how does he know evil? Does his knowledge of evil imply he created it?
This is where Aquinas leans heavily on Augustine. Evil is not a thing in itself. It is not a substance.
It's a lack.
Yes, evil is a privation, a lack of a good that ought to be there, like blindness is the privation of sight, or a hole is a lack of fabric in a shirt.
Okay, I like that analogy.
You don't know a hole by looking at the hole itself, because the hole is nothing. You know the hole by knowing the fabric around it. Similarly, God knows evil perfectly by knowing the good that the evil is depriving. He comprehends the absence by perfectly knowing the presence.
That is such a clean, logical defense. But he is constantly navigating these massive paradoxes. Let's look at questions 21 and 22. In question 21, he dissects the justice and mercy of God, and then immediately follows it up in question 22 with the providence of God.
These are the big ones.
He asks if absolutely everything is subject to this providence, and crucially, whether that providence imposes necessity on things foreseen. Basically, if God is outside of time and already knows exactly what I'm going to do tomorrow, do I actually have free will? Or am I just playing out a pre-written script?
It is the ultimate theological trap, and it has broken the systems of lesser philosophers.
It really has.
If you say God's foreknowledge makes things necessary, you destroy human free will and moral culpability. If you say human free will can surprise God, you destroy God's omniscience. Aquinas walks the tightrope brilliantly by utilizing that concept of eternity we discussed earlier.
Because God isn't looking into the future, right?
Exactly. To God, there is no future. He sees the entire timeline of history in a single simultaneous glance.
Right.
The classic analogy, though not strictly Aquinas's, is a man standing on a high watchtower watching a line of people walking down a road. The people in the line only see the person directly in front of them and directly behind them, past and future.
But the man on the tower sees the whole line at once.
Exactly. God seeing you make a choice doesn't force you to make the choice any more than my watching you drink a cup of coffee forces you to drink it. His knowledge is eternal, but your action happens contingently in time.
He argues that God's providence manages things according to their specific nature. So, for the physical laws of the universe, things that act out of necessity like gravity or planetary orbits, God's providence ensures they happen necessarily.
Yes.
But for rational creatures with intellect and will, God's providence ensures that they act freely. The system is designed to accommodate human choice.
He refuses to let the omnipotence of God cancel out the reality of human nature. It's a universe of immense, staggering order. Every single thing has a specific nature, a specific cause, and a specific end. The Summa is an attempt to reverse engineer that blueprint.
That deep belief in the rationality of the universe leads to my absolute favorite part of this first section. It almost feels like a late-night dorm room debate. Question 25, Article 4, whether God can make the past not to have been.
It's a great question.
He is tackling a 13th century time travel paradox. If God is truly all-powerful, omnipotent, can he change history?
It's a brilliant stress test of the concept of omnipotence, and his conclusion is rooted entirely in the law of non-contradiction. Aquinas argues that even absolute omnipotence cannot do what implies a logical contradiction.
So it's not a lack of power on God's part?
Not at all. It's about the nature of reality. To say that an event occurred in the past and then to say it did not occur is to assert that something is and is not at the same time and in the same respect.
Which is impossible.
That is a logical absurdity. It is a non-entity. Therefore, God cannot make the past not to have been, because the concept itself is just meaningless noise. God's power extends to all things that are possible, but a logical contradiction isn't a thing that is difficult to do, it's just nothing.
I suppose that's different from a miracle, where God suspends a natural law, like parting a sea.
Right.
Parting a sea doesn't violate logic, it just violates physics. But making a square circle or making the sinking of the Titanic not have happened while it remains a historical fact, those violate absolute logic.
Exactly. The logic holds reality together.
It's fascinating to see these massive thought experiments playing out in the 1200s. And that rigorous approach to the mechanics of reality is the perfect bridge into our next topic. Because once Aquinas establishes the absolute nature of God, he moves down the cosmic ladder to the beings right below the divine level. We are looking at the physics and psychology of angels.
Yes, the treatise on the angels. This spans questions 50 to 64, and he returns to them to discuss their actions on humans in questions 106 to 114.
It's a huge section.
It is. If the section on God demonstrated Aquinas' logical rigor, the angelology is where he truly earns his historical title as the angelic doctor. He builds an entire metaphysical framework for spiritual creatures.
He starts by determining their basic substance in questions 50 and 51. Are they entirely incorporeal? Do they have bodies naturally united to them? Because obviously anyone reading the biblical text in the 13th century would say, well, angels show up and talk to people. They eat with Abraham. They wrestle with Jacob. They must have physical bodies.
Aquinas addresses those scriptural objections directly. He determines, philosophically, that the perfection of the universe requires there to be purely spiritual creatures.
How so?
Well, if you have pure matter with no spirit, like a rock, and creatures with both matter and spirit, like humans, then the hierarchy demands creatures that are pure spirit with no matter. Therefore, angels are entirely incorporeal. They do not have bodies naturally united to them.
So what happens when they wrestle with Jacob or eat a meal? Are they projecting holograms?
He argues that they assume bodies. They don't become human. They manipulate physical matter, perhaps condensing the air itself to form a tangible shape that human senses can interact with.
That sounds like science fiction.
It really does. But crucially, they don't exercise the functions of life in those assumed bodies. When the angel eats with Abraham, there is no true digestion occurring. The angel is just operating the physical form like a complex, tangible puppet in order to communicate a message.
Here's where it gets really interesting, the physics of an incorporeal being. Question 52 asks whether an angel is in a place.
A classic problem.
Because if they don't have physical dimensions, no height, width, or depth, how can they occupy space? Can an angel be in several places at once? Do several angels share the exact same space?
Aquinas is essentially establishing the hard rules of a multidimensional system. He says that an angel is not in a place circumscriptively, the way your body occupies the dimensions of a chair.
Okay.
Instead, an angel is in a place definitively by applying its spiritual power to a specific physical location.
So it's defined by its action, not its mass.
Exactly. An angel is where it acts. If an angel is manipulating the air to form a body in a specific room, the angel is in that room. And because its power is finite, it can only apply its power to one place at a time. It cannot be omnipresent like God.
Right.
Furthermore, because two angels cannot be the complete cause of the exact same localized action simultaneously, two angels cannot be in the exact same place at the same time.
That sets up question 53, the local movement of angels, which might be one of the most conceptually wild parts of the Summa.
It is mind-bending.
Do they pass through intermediate space when they move? And is their movement instantaneous? I found myself reading this thinking it reads like a modern physicist trying to explain quantum mechanics or a sci-fi author defining the rules for a teleportation drive.
The parallels are striking, aren't they? If an angel goes from point A to point C, does it have to travel through point B?
Right.
Aquinas says that because an angel's presence in a place is defined by the application of its power, its movement is just the successive application of that power to different places. An angel can choose to apply its power continuously, passing through the intervening space.
With flying.
Yes. Or it can move non-continuously. It can withdraw its power from point A and instantly apply it to point C without ever having been at point B.
It really is a 13th century description of quantum leaping, or a metaphysical wormhole. The angel isn't flying really fast, it's literally reassigning its location coordinate.
That's a great way to put it.
And he doesn't stop at their physics. He goes deep into their psychology and communication. Questions 57 and 58 deal with angelic knowledge. Do they know singular things? Do they know our secret thoughts? And then he introduces this incredibly poetic framework. Do they have morning and evening knowledge?
The concept of morning and evening knowledge is drawn from Augustine's interpretation of the days of creation in Genesis, which Aquinas adopts and expands.
It's a beautiful metaphor.
It really is. It's a way of categorizing the dual awareness of a purely spiritual intellect. Morning knowledge is the knowledge angels have of things as they exist in the Word of God. They are looking at the uncreated truth, knowing the universe by looking directly at the Creator's blueprint.
And evening knowledge.
Evening knowledge is knowing things as they exist in their own created nature, looking down at the creation itself.
So it's the difference between knowing the source code of a software program versus looking at the user interface on the screen. And speaking of looking at things, what about our secret thoughts? Question 57, Article 4. I found it quite reassuring that Aquinas definitively states angels cannot read our minds natively.
That is a crucial boundary he draws. Only God can see directly into the human will and the intellect.
Good to know.
But angels are endowed with an incredibly superior, penetrating intellect. They understand the entire physiological and psychological makeup of humanity perfectly.
So they can guess.
Yes, very accurately. So, while they can't read your mind, they can deduce your thoughts from your external physical reactions, a slight change in heart rate, a microexpression, a shift in humors with terrifying accuracy.
They are essentially the ultimate mentalists,
Basically, yes.
and they use that intellect to communicate with each other. In question 107, he asks how they speak and whether local distance influences their speech. If two angels are on opposite sides of the universe, does it take longer for them to talk?
He concludes that angelic speech is a purely spiritual act. An angel speaks by simply directing its mental concept to another angel's intellect, because it involves no physical medium, no sound waves traveling through air, local distance is completely irrelevant.
So it is pure, unfiltered, instantaneous telepathy.
Exactly.
This angelic hierarchy is so orderly and luminous, but Aquinas doesn't ignore the shadow side. He dedicates questions 63 and 64 to the demons, the fallen angels. He asks profound structural questions. Did the devil desire to be as God? Were any demons naturally wicked from the moment of creation, or did they fall?
He is exceptionally careful here to maintain the absolute goodness of God's creation. He completely rejects any form of dualism where there is an equal opposing force of natural evil.
Like a yin and yang thing.
Right, he rejects that. In question 63, Article 4, he asks whether any demons are naturally wicked, and the answer is a resounding no. Everything God creates is inherently good. The demons were created as magnificent luminous angels. Their malice is entirely a result of their own free will.
So what was the nature of the fall? If they were created with such perfect intellects, how could they make such a massive error? Why would the devil desire to be God if his intellect was sharp enough to know that a creature can never become the creator?
That is the core of Aquinas' analysis. He argues that the devil didn't want to be God in the sense of usurping the divine throne or changing his nature to become the creator.
Hey, that would be illogical.
Right, that would be an impossible desire for a perfectly rational creature.
Hmm.
Rather, the devil wanted to be like God by attaining his own ultimate beatitude, his ultimate happiness, by his own natural power, rather than relying on God's grace.
I see.
He wanted to be the architect of his own perfection. It was the absolute quintessential act of pride, a refusal to be subordinate to the divine rule.
And their punishment is so vivid. Question 64, Article 4 asks whether our atmosphere is the demon's place of punishment.
Aquinas draws on the scriptural tradition, referring to the devil as the prince of the power of the air. He argues that while hell is the ultimate place of punishment for the demons, until the final judgment, many of them are bound to the dark, lower atmosphere surrounding the earth.
This is right above us.
Yes, they are permitted to be here to test and try human beings.
The idea that the very air around us is saturated with this spiritual conflict is intensely dramatic, and it leads perfectly into how these spiritual beings interact with us. Do they mess with our heads? In question 111, he asks if angels can change a man's will, imagination, or senses.
He draws a hard line at the human will. No created spirit, good or evil, can force the human will. Our free choice remains inviolate.
But they can do other things.
Oh, yes. They can act upon our physical faculties. Both good angels and demons can manipulate the humors of our bodies, and they can present phantasms, sensory images, or memories to our internal senses. By stirring up our imagination or passions, they can heavily influence the conditions under which we make a decision, even if they can't make the decision for us.
But we aren't just left exposed to this demonic influence, right? Question 113 is entirely devoted to guardian angels. He asks if there is one for each individual person. Do they ever forsake us? Do they experience grief if we sin or suffer?
It is a deeply structural view of divine providence. God governs the lower through the higher. Therefore, every single human being from the moment of birth is assigned a guardian angel from the lower choirs of angels.
And do they leave us?
Aquinas concludes that they never completely forsake us. Even if a person goes down a terrible path, the angel remains to prevent even greater evils from occurring.
What about grief?
As for grief, because angels are in a state of perfect beatitude and aligned entirely with God's will, they do not experience the negative emotion of sorrow. They act to guide us, but our failures do not disturb their eternal peace.
That guidance is necessary because in question 114, he outlines the assaults of the demons. He asks a fascinating question about whether demons can lead men astray with real miracles. If a demon makes a statue talk or cures a disease, is that a true miracle?
Aquinas defines a true miracle as something that occurs entirely outside the order of created nature. Only God, the author of nature, can perform a true miracle. Demons cannot suspend the laws of physics,
But they can trick us.
heavily. Because they possess an exhaustive knowledge of the natural world, they know the hidden properties of seeds, elements, and biology. They can manipulate natural causes so incredibly fast and efficiently that, to our limited human perception, it looks like a miracle. It is essentially advanced, preternatural sleight of hand.
It's like a magician using sophisticated chemistry to trick an audience, just scaled up to a cosmic level.
That's a perfect comparison.
Aquinas builds this massive, intricate spiritual scaffolding before he finally looks down at the creature situated right in the middle of everything. We're transitioning now to the creature that straddles the boundary line between the material universe and the spiritual universe. We are looking at the human blueprint, the soul, the body, and the ultimate hypothetical state of human perfection.
The Treatise on Man covers questions 75 through 102. Having analyzed beings of pure matter and beings of pure spirit, Aquinas now has to explain the hybrid. How do you integrate immortal spirit with corruptible flesh into a single unified being?
He tackles the core problem immediately in question 75. He examines the essence of the human soul. He asks, is the soul a body? No. Is it subsistent? Meaning, does it have an operation independent of the physical body, allowing it to exist on its own? And how does it fundamentally differ from the souls of brute animals?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Aquinas is synthesizing Christian theology with Aristotelian biology. For Aristotle, the soul is simply the form of a living body. It is the organizing principle that makes a pile of carbon, water, and calcium into a living dog or a living oak tree.
So animals have souls.
Yes, plants have souls and animals have souls, but those souls are entirely dependent on the physical matter. When the dog's body dies, the dog's soul ceases to exist. It has no independent operation.
But Aquinas argues the human soul is an exception to that rule.
Yes, because the human soul has a specific operation intellectual understanding that does not utilize a physical organ.
Wait, doesn't it use the brain?
It uses the brain for imagination and memory, but the intellect grasps universal abstract concepts like justice or infinity, which have no physical dimensions. Because the intellect operates independently of matter, the soul that houses it must be subsistent. It has its own independent existence. Therefore, when the physical body dies, the human soul is incorruptible. It survives.
But while we are alive, that soul is doing a lot of heavy lifting.
Yeah.
In question 78, he breaks down the powers of the soul into a hierarchy. At the base, there's the vegetative power, nutritive, augmentative, generative, basically the systems for digesting food, growing, and reproducing.
Right.
Then you level up to the sentient powers, which includes the 5 exterior senses we all know: sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch. But the part that really fascinated me was his breakdown of the interior senses.
The interior senses are a brilliant piece of medieval psychology. It's not enough to just receive raw data from the eyes or ears. The brain has to process it. Aquinas lists 4 interior senses. First is the common sense, and he doesn't mean practical street smarts.
Not like, oh, he has good common sense.
No, he means the faculty that integrates the data from the 5 exterior senses into a single, coherent psychological experience. It's what tells you that the white shape you see, the coldness you feel, and the crunching sound you hear all belong to the same snowball.
Right, because the eyes only see color, the ears only hear sound. Something has to tie them together.
Exactly. Then you have the imagination, which stores those forms. You have memory, which stores the timeline of those forms. And finally, you have the estimative power, which is essentially instinct.
How's that work?
It perceives practical intentions that the raw senses cannot pick up. His classic example is a sheep seeing a wolf. The sheep's eye just sees a gray, furry shape. But the estimative power perceives the concept of danger or enemy without having to reason through it.
But humans have something above that estimative power. We have the intellect, which he tackles in questions 79, 84, and 85. He wants to know exactly how the soul understands bodies. How do we take physical data and turn it into abstract thought? He uses these terms, the active intellect and the passive intellect. He talks about abstracting from phantasms. This seems like the absolute core of his theory of knowledge.
It is the cornerstone of Thomistic epistemology. Aquinas strongly rejects the idea that human beings are born with innate ideas already programmed into our minds, like Plato thought. He follows the Aristotelian maxim that nothing is in the intellect that was not first in the senses. We start as a blank slate.
So how do we get from a physical eye seeing a specific tree to the philosophical concept of treeness?
Let's walk through the mechanics. You look at a golden retriever, Your exterior senses gather the data: golden fur, panting forelegs. Your common sense binds it together. Your imagination creates a mental image, which Aquinas calls a phantasm.
Okay, I've had it.
But that phantasm is still material. It's an image of one specific dog in a specific place. The human mind possesses an active intellect. It functions almost like an X-ray or a spotlight. It shines upon that phantasm and strips away all the specific material individuating conditions, the specific color, the exact size, the location. It abstracts the universal pure essence of dogness.
It extracts the source code.
Yes. And that abstracted universal concept is then received by the passive intellect, which understands it. It is a highly mechanical, precise explanation of how human cognition bridges the gap between the material world and abstract thought.
Having mapped out exactly how a human functions in the present day, Aquinas takes us backward to the ultimate what-if scenario. He tests his human blueprint against the theological concept of original perfection. In questions 94 through 102, he analyzes the state of innocence Adam and Eve in paradise before the fall.
It's a fascinating thought experiment.
The hypothetical questions he asks are intense. Did the first man see God through his essence? Could he be deceived? Did he have passions?
He uses the state of innocence as a control group for human nature. He wants to see what the human machine looks like when every single gear is perfectly aligned. He determines that Adam did not see God's essence directly because that requires the beatific vision of heaven. But Adam had an unclouded, profound knowledge of God mediated through creation. Furthermore, Adam couldn't be deceived.
Why not? If he didn't know everything, couldn't he make a mistake?
In Aquinas' view, error happens when the lower faculties, the passions or the imagination, override or confuse the intellect. But in the state of original justice, there was perfect hierarchical submission. The body was perfectly subject to the soul, the lower passions were perfectly subject to reason, and reason was perfectly subject to God.
Perfect order.
Therefore, while Adam didn't know everything, he would never assent to something that was false. His intellect was perfectly calibrated, he had passions like love and joy, but they were never unruly. They obeyed the command of his reason completely.
That perfect order leads to question 96, Article 3. Whether men were equal in this state of innocence. You might expect him to say yes, paradise means absolute egalitarianism. But his answer is no. Even before the fall, there would have been inequalities.
Yes, he argues there would be disparities in age, sex, and even physical or intellectual capacity. Some would be naturally stronger or more insightful.
That sounds like a flaw in paradise.
Not to Aquinas. Inequality for Aquinas doesn't mean injustice or oppression. He views the universe as a beautiful hierarchy of varied goods. A symphony is beautiful precisely because the instruments are unequal. They play different notes and have different roles. In the state of innocence, those with superior intellects would naturally govern and guide others, not for exploitation, but for the common good of the community.
He even asks practical questions, like whether they would have needed food in question 97. And the answer is yes, because they still had biological bodies that consumed energy, though they had the fruit of the tree of life to preserve them from aging and death.
He leaves no detail out.
It's wildly specific. But as specific as he is about the perfect life, he is just as rigorous about the mechanics of death. Which brings up the problem of the separated soul in question 89.
This is a phenomenal example of Aquinas pushing his own system to the absolute breaking point to test its integrity. He just established exhaustively that human knowledge requires a body. We need physical senses to gather data, and we need the physical brain's imagination to produce the phantasms that our active intellect abstracts from.
Right. No body, no senses. No senses, no phantasms.
Exactly. So what happens when you die and your soul is separated from your body, but you haven't been resurrected yet? Can the ghost think? If the hardware is gone, how does the software run? He asks, can a separated soul understand anything?
To use a modern analogy, the soul has essentially lost its local hard drive and all its peripheral inputs. How does it process data?
Aquinas argues that the separated soul has to undergo a radical paradigm shift in its mode of understanding. It can no longer abstract from phantasms. Instead, God directly infuses the soul with intelligible species, direct downloads of conceptual knowledge, very similar to how angels natively know things.
So it connects to the divine cloud, so to speak.
Yes, the divine cloud. However, because it is unnatural for a human soul to be without its body, we are not angels, we are humans, its understanding in this state is more confused and general.
And as for knowing what happens on Earth, does the separated soul watch over his living relatives?
Naturally, they do not. Because they are disconnected from the sensory world, the dead do not know the daily singular affairs of the living. Their minds are turned toward the spiritual realities unless God specifically chooses to reveal a terrestrial event to them.
That is a profound, almost stark shift from the busy, sense-driven life you described earlier. And it raises the ultimate question of what all this living and dying is actually for. That signals a major transition in the Summa. We are moving from the first part, which outlines the players God, angels, humans, into the first part of the second part.
We're getting into the action.
Exactly. The focus shifts entirely to teleology, morality, law, and human action. We are exploring the pursuit of happiness.
The treatise on the last end, questions 1 through 5. Having defined what a human being is, Aquinas now asks, what is the human being for? What is our trajectory?
In question 1, he lays the foundation.
Hmm.
Does it belong to man to act for an end? Yes, rational creatures act with purpose. Is there one last end of human life? Do all men have the same last end?
And his answer is yes.
He argues that yes, objectively, there is only one ultimate goal that fulfills human nature, even if subjectively people get terribly confused about what that goal is. And that leads to question 2, which is honestly one of the most brilliant psychological teardowns of human vanity I've ever encountered. He initiates a systematic process of elimination to discover what happiness actually consists of.
It reads like a modern critique of consumerism and ambition. He poses a series of specific candidates for ultimate happiness. He starts with wealth. Is happiness wealth?
And he says no.
He says no. Wealth is merely a tool, a means to an end. It exists to buy things. Happiness must be an end in itself. You don't use happiness to get something else.
What about honors? People spend their whole lives trying to get awards and recognition.
He dismisses honors. Honors are bestowed upon you by other people. They are outside your control and can be taken away. More importantly, people usually honor you because of some excellence or virtue you already possess. The honor is just an acknowledgement. Therefore, true happiness must be the excellence itself, not the external acknowledgement of it.
He keeps going down the list. Is it fame or glory? No. Human knowledge is notoriously flawed. People are easily deceived, and fame is fickle. Is it power?
He argues that power is a principle of action. It's a capacity to do good or evil. True happiness can only be good, and it must be a completed realization, not just a potential capacity.
Is it any bodily good, like perfect health, strength, or beauty?
He rejects bodily goods because the body is ordained to the soul. Furthermore, if happiness consisted in bodily perfection, humans wouldn't even be the happiest creatures. An elephant is stronger. A falcon has better eyesight. Our ultimate end must relate to what makes us uniquely human.
The one that always catches people off guard is when he asks if happiness is pleasure. You would think, by definition, absolute pleasure is happiness, where he makes a crucial surgical distinction here.
Yes, pleasure is not the goal. Pleasure is the byproduct of achieving the goal. When you attain a good thing that you desire, your will rests in that attainment. That rest, that satisfaction, is pleasure.
Okay, I follow.
But the pleasure itself isn't the final end. The thing you attained is the final end. Pleasure is the caboose, not the engine. If you make pleasure the goal itself, it slips through your fingers.
So what does this all mean? He strips away wealth, honor, fame, power, the body, and pleasure. What is left? Question 3 drops the ultimate conclusion. Happiness is an operation of the speculative intellect, consisting specifically in the vision of the divine essence.
He builds an airtight syllogism here. The human intellect has a natural, insatiable desire to know the causes of things. When we see an effect in the world, we want to know why it happened.
Like curiosity.
Right. That desire will not rest, it will not be satisfied until it knows the first cause of all things. Perfect, ultimate happiness, therefore, cannot possibly be found in this life, where our knowledge is mediated through senses and phantasms. It consists in the beatific vision, seeing God face to face in the next life. It is the perfect satisfaction of our intellect's desire to know absolute truth, and our will's desire to love absolute goodness.
It's incredible to relate this 13th century metaphysical view to modern psychological research. We talked today about the hedonic treadmill, the empirical data showing that you can make millions of dollars, win an Oscar, become the CEO, and within a few months, your brain adapts and you return to your baseline level of anxiety or dissatisfaction.
No, it's so true.
Aquinas diagnosed a hedonic treadmill 800 years ago. He mathematically eliminated finite goals because a finite object can never satisfy an infinite capacity for desire.
He addresses the mechanics of that satisfaction in question 5, the attainment of happiness. He asks, can happiness, once had, be lost? If you achieve that ultimate vision of God, could you get bored of it? Could you eventually choose to look away?
It's a valid question. We get bored of everything else.
We get bored of finite things because every finite good has some defect, some lack. But Aquinas argues that once the intellect directly beholds the divine essence, the universal and perfect good, the will is utterly captivated. It perfectly and eternally satisfies every possible vector of desire. You cannot possibly will to turn away from it because there is no perceived better alternative. You are eternally, immutably locked into joy.
But the catch is, to get to that eternal joy, we have to navigate the obstacle course of this material world. We have to act. We have to make choices. And that sets up our final section, the anatomy of action. He has established the goal line, and now he is deconstructing the exact mechanics of human behavior to show us how we move toward or away from that goal.
This is the treatise on human acts, spanning questions 6 through 21. If you thought the physics of angels was detailed, Aquinas' breakdown of a single moral choice puts human behavior under an electron microscope.
He starts in question 6 with the concepts of the voluntary and the involuntary. He is asking, what makes an action truly ours? He analyzes how extreme circumstances affect our voluntariness. Things like violence, fear, concupiscence, which means strong, passionate desire, and ignorance.
Let's look at fear because his analysis is incredibly nuanced. If someone holds a sword to your head and forces you to perform a physical action by overpowering your limbs, that is absolute violence, and it completely destroys the voluntary nature of the act. You are not culpable.
Right.
But what if you are the captain of a ship caught in a massive storm and you throw all the expensive cargo overboard to keep the ship from sinking?
You certainly didn't want to throw the cargo away. You did it out of fear of drowning. So is it involuntary?
Aquinas says it is actually voluntary. Absolutely speaking, you didn't want to lose the cargo. But in the specific circumstances of the storm, your will actively chose to throw it over to save your life. The fear influenced the choice, but it did not destroy the freedom to choose. Therefore, you are the author of the action.
His breakdown of ignorance is equally fascinating. We often say ignorance of the law is no excuse, but he adds layers to it. Does ignorance cause an act to be involuntary?
He distinguishes between antecedent, concomitant, and consequent ignorance. If you are hunting in the woods, you take every reasonable precaution, you aim at what you clearly see as a deer, but a man inexplicably jumps in front of the arrow at the last millisecond, that is, antecedent ignorance. It makes the act involuntary. You are not a murderer.
Makes sense.
However, consequent ignorance is when you intentionally choose not to know something so that you have an excuse. If you refuse to check if the gun is loaded before pulling the trigger in a crowded room, your ignorance is voluntary, and therefore the disastrous action is voluntary. You are fully culpable.
This level of granularity forms the basis for so much of Western jurisprudence. And he takes it even further when he traces the microsteps of a single human decision. In questions 12 through 17, he breaks down what feels to us like a single, instantaneous choice into distinct chronological components.
He identifies a sequence of distinct acts of the intellect and the will. It starts with intention, in question 12, the will moving toward an end, like I want to get a college degree. Then comes counsel or inquiry, question 14. The intellect deliberating on the means to achieve that end. Should I go to a local state school or move out of state?
Then consent, question 15. The will agrees to the viable options presented by the intellect. Both of those are acceptable paths.
Then choice, question 13. The will decisively picks the best option from the consented list. I choose the local state school. This is followed by use, question 16, and commanded acts, question 17, where the will actually directs the physical body to execute the plan, filling out the application.
This raises the obvious question, why meticulously dissect a single, seemingly fluid action into these tiny, manageable components?
This raises an important question, yes, because Aquinas is trying to pinpoint the exact location of moral failure. It's an incredibly sophisticated legal and psychological framework for evaluating culpability, what modern law calls mens rea, the guilty mind.
Finding the exact breaking point.
Right. If the decision-making process breaks down at the counsel phase because you were genuinely misinformed by a bad advisor, your moral culpability is drastically different than if you perfectly evaluated the options, but your choice was purely malicious. He is mapping the anatomy of sin and virtue.
And that leads directly into the final major topic we're covering today, the good and evil of human acts, in questions 18 through 21. How do we determine the moral flavor of a completed action? Does it come from what you did, why you did it, or the situation around it?
He argues it must come from all three. The moral goodness of an action depends on its object, its end, and its circumstances. The object is the fundamental nature of the action itself. The end is the intention behind it, and the circumstances are the specific context.
So you need all three.
Crucially, Aquinas establishes the rule that for an action to be morally good, all three of these elements must be good. A defect in any single one of them corrupts the entire action and renders it evil.
Let's apply that to a classic ethical dilemma: stealing money. The object is taking property that belongs to another person against their reasonable will. That object is intrinsically evil. But what if the end is noble? What if you were stealing the money strictly to feed starving children? The classic Robin Hood scenario.
The modern consequentialist might argue that the good outcome justifies the action. Aquinas vehemently rejects that. He says a good intention cannot magically transform an intrinsically evil object into a good one. You cannot do evil that good may come of it. The action remains morally defective even if the intention lessens the severity of the guilt.
But the reverse is also true, which is terrifying. He says a bad intention can completely ruin a perfectly good action. If you give a large sum of money to a charity, which is a good object, but your end is entirely to buy votes for an upcoming election or to stroke your own ego and receive praise, the entire action becomes morally defective. The bad end corrupts the good object.
Exactly. And finally, the circumstances matter immensely. Question 7 highlights this. He lists the circumstances as who, what, where, by what aids, why, how, and when. The context can change a venial minor sin into a mortal one.
Because context is everything.
Right. Stealing a few coins from a billionaire's sprawling estate is morally different from stealing the last few coins from a starving widow. Striking someone in a boxing ring is entirely different from striking a priest inside a church. The circumstances alter the species of the moral act.
He literally leaves no stone unturned. He breaks human existence, motivation, and physical action down into a pure executable code.
He is compiling the ultimate operating system for the human soul.
To summarize the sheer scale of the Summa Theologica in a single conversation is impossible, but I hope we've traced the incredible trajectory of his thought today. From mathematically defining the nature of an infinite, eternal God, to calculating the local, multidimensional movement of angels, to mapping the precise interface where the human soul powers the biological machine.
It's an incredible journey.
To defining the ultimate pursuit of happiness by systematically eliminating wealth, fame, and power, right down to the exact microanatomy of a single human choice. Aquinas didn't just write a book. He attempted to build a complete, perfectly rational, logically consistent framework for all of reality.
And regardless of whether you accept his metaphysical premises or his theological conclusions, the intellectual architecture he constructed is breathtaking. It is a monument to the capacity of human reason.
And that brings me to the value of this kind of thinking for you, the listener, today. Even if you don't share the 13th century worldview, there is something deeply inspiring, almost therapeutic, about this commitment. The dedication to asking rigorous, systematic questions about absolutely every aspect of existence. We live in an era of unprecedented information overload, where we are bombarded with disconnected data points all day long.
A storm of information.
Exactly. Aquinas shows us that you can prevent intellectual chaos if you take the time to build a structural framework. You can categorize the universe if you have the right map.
It's an antidote to the modern feeling of fragmentation. He believed that truth is a unified whole, and he wasn't afraid of any question, no matter how bizarre or complex, because he trusted that reason could find its proper place in the system.
So I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over. Aquinas believed that by asking a relentless, ordered series of whether questions, you could construct an unshakable map of truth. In our modern age, where we have access to infinitely more data but perhaps a lot less overarching structure, what would your personal Summa look like?
That's a great question.
If you had to sit down today and break down your foundational beliefs about the universe, human nature, and ultimate happiness into a rigorous series of whether questions, where would you even begin? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.